so much to this evening, the first iteration of our Authors in Their Homes event. My name is Lindsay. I am the Director of Development here at Deep Vellum. If you are new to Deep Vellum, we are an independent publishing house and literary arts center here in Dallas. So welcome to your first Deep Vellum event. Our marketing and sales director, Sarah, and I have been creating virtual events to bring our authors to you and to showcase the literary world of Texas. We are especially excited tonight because, as I said, we're launching this series, Authors in Their Homes. Our international writers are taking you on tours of their home offices and other places of inspiration in cities where they live, and we're really excited to show you some of our incredible international writers. Tonight, we will have a fascinating tour from Noemi Jaffe, who you've already heard from if you're on the Zoom call. She is a Brazilian writer who lives in Sao Paulo. In 2016, Deep Vellum published the English translation of Jaffe's book, What Are the Blind Men Dreaming?, which came out in the original Portuguese in 2012. In this book, Jaffe uses storytelling to bear witness to the Holocaust through the voices of 3 generations of women: her own mother, who was a survivor of Auschwitz, Noemi herself, and her granddaughter. Noemi will talk a little bit about this book and others in the upcoming tour. So in the Zoom chat box, I'm gonna add a link to the book on our website if you'd like to learn more or purchase the book, and I'll add it in the Facebook comments as well, so you can look there if you'd like to know more. And in addition, for those of you on Zoom, you already know this, but we are so thrilled that Noemi is with us this evening. After the video ends, we're gonna have a short question and answer session. So if you have questions about the book or about Noemi's work in general, you can post them in the chat box or the Facebook comments, and then I will read them aloud and moderate a Q&A session afterward. Just before we begin the video, I want to tell you about a couple of upcoming virtual events that we have at Deep Vellum. So next week, we will begin a panel series entitled Accessibility in the Literary Arts. On Wednesday, August 26th at 5 p.m., so that's almost a week exactly from today, we will host the first of these events, which is a panel entitled Dyslexia Strategies for Inclusion. And the event features 2 Texas writers and a Texas activist who work on ensuring inclusion for people with dyslexia in schools, the workplace, and the literary world. And also for those of you who attend, we'll be doing some giveaways during that event. The following week, on Wednesday, September 2nd at 1 p.m., we'll have the next iteration of our lunchtime Texas Literary Spotlight series. I'm letting some more people in here. For this version of this iteration of Texas Literary Spotlight series, we will hear from Richard Santos, whose debut novel, Trust Me, was just released in March. And you can catch this event on our Instagram account at Deep Vellum. I'm gonna also put the event page link in the chat box and on Facebook comments in case you wanna keep up with our events. So without further ado, I'm going to start streaming our tour of Noemi's home workspace. And while we're watching, don't forget to post questions and comments in the Zoom chat or comments on Facebook. Thanks so much.
Hello, my name is Noemi Jaffe, and I'm a writer from São Paulo, Brazil. I'm very honored to have had my book published by Deep Vellum in 2016. This is the book that was published. It's called What Are the Blind Men Dreaming? And actually, it was not but it was written along with my mother and my daughter. So it was a book written by 3 generations of women. It's based on my mother's story. She was a prisoner in Auschwitz during the Second World War, and after she was rescued by the Red Cross and taken to Sweden in a city called Malmö, She was there in quarantine, and she wrote a diary. In this diary, she tells all her experience, everything that happened to her since she was in prison in Yugoslavia, the old Yugoslavia, now Serbia, until she was saved and rescued by the Red Cross, and everything that happened afterwards, until she went back to Yugoslavia to look for relatives, finally came to Brazil. So I based myself on this diary and also on conversations that I had with my mother. And after I myself went to Auschwitz with my daughter, because I got a grant from Petrobras, the oil company in Brazil, I wrote considerations, essays, and some fiction also based on the things I learned with this trip and everything I reflected upon after reading her diary. So this is the book that was published, and I was invited by the publishing company, Deep Vellum, to talk a little about my experiences as a writer, where I write, how I write, when I write. So I'm here to introduce you to a little of my life here in São Paulo, okay? So first of all, I'd like to show you my room. This is basically where I write. Right, so here you see some of my books, the books I'm reading, my couch. Here are some of my toys. I love to collect toys. I also love donkeys, so I have a little collection of donkeys. Right beside these toys, there's an image of one of my favorite movie directors, Agnès Varda, a woman director from France. And here, mainly, what I like to look at while I'm writing, it's this view through my windows, my big windows, and the trees, the grass. It's a real privilege that I have this view here in São Paulo. All right, when I wrote What Are the Blind Men Dreaming, something that I really based myself upon was my mother's diary, as I told you. Actually, the real diary was deposited, but here I have a copy of her diary with my mother's handwriting, and I really like to look at her handwriting. It tells a lot about her personality. Unfortunately, this year in February, she died. She was 93 years old. And I also love to look at pictures of her, of my mother when she was young. This is a picture of her when she was coming back to Yugoslavia after staying in Sweden and the soldiers from the army. This is a postcard that she sent to my father from Hungary, from Budapest, where she also lived. And here, this is my mother, already in Brazil when she was 80 years old. She always smiled. She looked very young all the time, as you can see. And I like to look at these pictures. They really inspire me. As I write in all my books, you will find things about these two topics: memory, the past, my not only my memories, but the memories of the characters. So I love to look at pictures. I love to look at pictures of my two kids. Now they're adults. They're no longer kids, but I like to think about the past. The past is very important for my present. And this is a picture of my mother and myself. So these are some of the things that I always like to use in my writings. Pictures. I like to look at the eyes of the people in the past and imagine what they were thinking about their future. So this mixture of past, present, and future is something very important in my writing. How the past is always present in the present, and how the present is soon to become past. So this phenomenon of time and how people deal with it or don't deal with it is part of my writings, especially my last book, my latest book, which still wasn't translated into English, is this book. In Portuguese it's called O que ela sussurra. In English it's What She Whispers. And it's about a woman, a real woman that actually existed in Russia. She died in 1980, and she was the wife of a very famous poet in Russia called Osip Mandelstam. And this man to a sort of a concentration camp, a labor camp in Russia. And he died in this labor camp, and nobody could have any of his poems published or written because the person would be threatened of death if the police found this person with a poem of his written. And so this woman, Nadezhda Mandelstam, Nadezhda means hope in Russian, she memorized 300 of her husband's poems during 25 years. She whispered these poems every day until she memorized them all, until they were published in 1962 after 25 years of her whispering and memorizing his poems. So this book is also about memory, and the first part of the book is a monologue about time. Her fantasy, her idea is that she could stop time itself by whispering his poems. And she was not the only woman in Russia who was memorizing, because so many men were sent to prison and sent to death that many women were memorizing and whispering and saying their husbands' poems, letters, scientific writings, essays, everything. So I kind of imagined a web of women together in Russia, all of them whispering their husbands' works together, and that this web of women together would preserve Russia's art and culture. So as you can see, many of my books talk about memory. I'll show you some of my other books. Unfortunately, I don't have them all here with me. It's common, right, to find writers who don't have all of their books. This is one of my other books called The Real Story of the Alphabet. And so this book is invented stories of the letters of the alphabet. As you can see, A, B, C, D, E, F. So every one of the letters, to every one of the letters, I invented a story, a fictional story, trying to invent how this letter was invented, and also a word that was invented along with the letter. For example, F and fury, I imagine, were born together. G is difficult to translate into English, but for example, age and hemisphere. So to each one of the letters, I invented a story. This is another book called The Book of Beginnings. And there's something curious about this book because it was written in blades. So every blade is a different beginning. So beginning is difficult, beginning is easy, beginning is fun, beginning is sad. And you can read this book in any order you wish. And this is one of my oldest books. It's called When Nothing is Going On, When Nothing is Happening. and it consists of excerpts from a blog I used to have, and it contains stories that happened in my life, little stories, and it is also illustrated, and also some stories about words and languages, because one of the things that really fascinates me is the story of words, etymology, origins of words, history of words. And so I'm showing you these books because there are others that are not here, because one of the features of my writing, I think, is this combination of playfulness and melancholy. If it's possible to combine these two things, I think this is something that really characterizes my writing. The idea that I can play with words, that I can experiment with different resources. I don't really like to write linearly, sequentially. I like to imagine different times, simultaneity of times, the idea of duration, how you can make people feel time as something that that can be tactful. That's why I like toys. As I was telling you before, I really have a lot of toys in my room, in my house. I like to use these toys. And I also love to work with dictionaries. This is a dictionary that says in Portuguese, where do words come from? So I like to use etymological dictionaries, analogical dictionaries. I always check online lexicons and how you can mix words in order to create something uncommon, something unexpected, something original. This is something I really like to work with. So, as I'm saying, one of the things I really like in my writing is to find strange combinations that people haven't thought about yet. So words, for example, what adjective does a noun ask for? So it's not simply, for example, a fat man or an old man or a thin woman or a beautiful woman, but how about, let me think, uh, uh, a mild angle, right? This is something really unexpected. And so in order to show you a little more how I try to work with this idea of melancholy combined with playfulness, I can show you some notebooks that I like to create. I'm showing you here two of my notebooks. They're like objects, but at the same time I've written a lot of words here. They are not random words, they are all meaningful words, and all of these words are about the impossibility of expressing what you really feel. I think it's because my mother's experience in Auschwitz, because of this experience, and because how I had to deepen into this experience, I had to deal with this idea that there are things in our lives that are totally unexpressible, that are unsayable, actually. So these notebooks, they try to express this unsayability of things. So at the same time, you have here a sort of experiment, a collage, something playful, but also something that is reflecting about time, about this inability to express what we feel. This is another example of the same idea, and I have other notebooks like these that I'm always working on. So talking about notebooks, these notebooks are also an inspiration that I have to my writing, because I'm always writing. And so every day I'm writing about my dreams, about the books I read, about the films I watch, about some ideas that I have, about exercises that I practice with my students. I'm also a teacher of creative writing. And so, as you can see, these notebooks are all filled with things that I think about every day. As a matter of fact, this is something I always tell my students, to keep small notebooks inside their purses, inside their pockets, in order to write things that come to mind every day. I think I've shown you the books I have with me, and now I want to show you a little bit of my influences. So here are just a few of my influences. Of course, Kafka is one of my influences. After everything that I've just said, of course, Kafka is a very important and strong influence in my writing. Now, for you Americans, it's also important to say how I love Lydia Davis and her style of writing, how she also writes in fragments, how she also combines this idea of irony, thoughtfulness, and playfulness. This is an Argentine writer who lived in Paris, Cortázar. He's an excellent writer and also an excellent essayist, and this is maybe his most famous book. I don't know how to say it in English. It's a game that they play on the street. The name in Spanish is Rayuela. This is a Brazilian writer, a very important Brazilian writer, which I also love, called Guimarães Rosa. This book is being translated into English by an excellent translator called Alison Entrequin. I think Will knows this woman. That it's going to be published in the United States very soon. And I also love literary criticism. So here is one of my favorite critics, Northrop Frye. He was a Canadian critic. This is one of his books, Myth and Metaphor. And also an American critic and writer called James Wood. I think you all know him. This is a book I also recommend a lot to my students, How Fiction Works. Well, this is just a summary of my room, my life, my style of writing, and I hope you enjoyed it, and I hope you also get interested in acquiring my book, What Are the Blind Men Dreaming, by Deep Vellum. And I also hope you go to Deep Vellum's bookstore in Dallas, which I visited and I loved. I loved Deep Ellum, the avenue, the neighborhood. And I hope to visit Dallas soon again if this terrible disease doesn't kill us before. And that's it, folks. I hope you like it. And if you have any questions, you can talk to Lindsay, and she'll send you my email, and I can answer your questions. Thank you very much. Goodbye. That's
So the great thing is that you don't have to send your questions to me. You can ask Noemi directly, who is with us. I'm going to take you off mute, Noemi. I think you no longer are. There we go. Thank you so much for that wonderful video. I hope everyone loved it as much as I do. I would love to field some questions. I see that Greg asked you what kind of reception did your mother get when she returned to Yugoslavia, both from her family and also from the general population?
I'm sorry, I didn't hear the end of the question.
What kind of reception did she get when she returned to Yugoslavia from her family and also from the general population?
All right. Well, there wasn't anyone left right? She could have stayed in Sweden, where they even invited her to continue living there. But she wanted to go back because she said maybe someone survived. But when she got to her city, nobody had survived, right? Only her brother, he had survived. He had joined the American army and he had gone to the United States. But in her city, no one was left. So she didn't have any kind of reception, right? She had to go to Hungary from Yugoslavia because a cousin of hers had moved to Hungary, had gotten married. And so she went to Hungary. And from Hungary, she married my father and came to Brazil.
Are there other questions? If you guys have questions, you can just type them right into the chat box. So we have a question. Your office is wonderful. How has your writing practice changed since COVID and quarantine?
Well, my whole life has changed, right? I think everyone's life has changed, especially our perspectives regarding what we can do, what is our future, what is our present. Nobody had expected to be living inside the house for so long. And so my writing, I think, also changed. For 96 days, I wrote a little diary every day, right? I wrote and I posted it on in Instagram and Facebook. And in these diaries, I wrote a lot about my routine, the small things that I was doing every day, like cooking, washing dishes. And I try to turn these things into something meaningful. And it worked. It worked a lot for me. And it worked, I think, for many people who were enjoying to read these diaries and identifying themselves with it. And so I think the small things of my routine have gained a different meaning during this disease. And I think I'm writing more about very small things, very apparently insignificant things, but that have acquired a different meaning these days.
Have you found that that's the case for other writers you're speaking with, like friends of yours?
I think most of my friends are not writing because such a weird situation. Most people are paralyzed because in Brazil, you know, I know the situation in the United States is also very serious, but in Brazil, I think it's even more serious. We don't have any hope that things might get better anytime. And so we're paralyzed.
Yeah. Fire. So we have a good queue of questions here. Liz asks, can you tell us about the art on the cover of the facsimile of your mother's diary?
Oh no, that's a notebook, a regular notebook that I bought anywhere.
I love it.
No, it's just that it's a notebook we bought in the 90s when we translated my mother's diary into Portuguese, because it was written in Yugoslavian, right, in Serbian. And so, as I said, the actual diary is in the Museum of the Holocaust in Jerusalem. And we bought a notebook and she copied everything, but it's just a regular notebook that you buy anywhere.
I love it. Another question, what language do you work in normally? Are some languages more helpful in expressing difficult notions?
No, I only write in Portuguese. And well, it's my language, it's my native language, and it's the language I love. And to me, it is perfectly, it's a perfect language to express everything that I want to say. I love English too, and I love languages in general. So whenever I write, I love to, as I said, check dictionaries and learn different words in different languages. And I try to find the exact translation for these words in Portuguese. So I'm always surveying and researching new words. I love words. It's something I'm always studying in many languages, but to find equivalents in Portuguese. But I only write in Portuguese.
What language did you speak with your mother primarily?
Portuguese, right? Because I'm the youngest of 3 women. And so when I was born, my parents already spoke Portuguese because I was born 13 years after they had arrived in Brazil. So they were already speaking Portuguese. But with my sister, my oldest sister, for example, they used to speak Yugoslavian, and my grandmother, who also lived with my parents, spoke German with my sister. And with me, my grandmother used to speak Hebrew.
A lot of languages. That's wonderful.
Yes.
Several more questions. When did you begin writing, and what was your early writing career like?
What was my early?
What was your early career like? Your early writing career?
Okay. Well, I began to write when I was very, very young. I always loved to read. It's kind of unexplainable because my parents and my sisters were not very good readers, and we didn't have many books in the house. But I always loved to read. And I began writing very early when I was like 9 or 10. And I continued writing all through my teenagehood. But when I was like 16, 17, I began participating in contests. And soon enough, I got into college to study literature. And I became a teacher of literature and Portuguese. And I always collected and accumulated poems and writings, especially poetry. I love to write poetry. But I only started publishing when I was 43. My first book is a book of poetry because I got married very early. I separated, I had kids, and I had to work to earn a living. And so it took me a long time to assume that I was a writer. And so only when I was 43, I published my first book. But since then, I haven't stopped, thank God.
Certainly, it seems like collecting is very important to you, both life experiences, but also your poems and your toys and letters and
Yes,
work.
yes, I'm a collector. I'm a collector. I think maybe this is due to my mother. She never, she hated to waste things. She was always keeping things. I think maybe it's because of her.
Yeah, that's very interesting. And I think it's a theme that comes up in some other literature about the Holocaust and survivors and second and third generation. It's fascinating.
Yes, yes. Now, my mother died in February, as I said, and then right after she died, we went to her apartment and we started looking at her things. And I saw, for example, that she had collected kind of 200, 300 napkins, like not fabric, right? Not paper napkins, but fabric napkins, very beautiful embroidered napkins, but they didn't have the corresponding towel, only the napkins. And there were about 300 napkins. It's so, we never knew about it.
And no story behind them. You didn't know where they came from.
Sure, yeah, I didn't know that she was collecting napkins.
That's fascinating.
Yes.
Question we have. Do you feel your writing will change from now on after the quarantine? And do you have a new perspective on writing?
Yes, I think it will change. Unfortunately, if it depends on my mood, I think it will be more somber. gloomier, I think, because I'm very disappointed with humanity, with my country, with politics. I'm not very optimistic about the future. Unfortunately, I have to be honest and say that that's the truth. And so I think I haven't tried yet. Maybe when I start writing, it doesn't come out this way because I'm not a sad person. I'm a joyful person. But my general mood today is very gloomy.
Actually, an excellent segue to the next question, which is about humor. Being able to laugh about the past is great, even for difficult times. And Sid says, I laugh right now about how a few of my neighbors don't wave because they're confused about how to be afraid of COVID. Moment you can recount in your life that is funny looking back, but frustrated you at the time it happened. And the end of this comment is, Portuguese is beautiful. My favorite song and phrase, mas que nada.
Mais que nada. I know, it's a very traditional song here in Brazil. It's very beautiful indeed. And I like the comment too. Yes, I love humor. And as I said, I'm a humorous person, but I don't know. Maybe it's today. I've been watching too many environmental movies.
I understand. I suspect they are in good company here. Another question is about your relationship with Deep Vellum. How did you get in touch with the Deep Vellum? How did you learn about Will? What was that process like?
Well, maybe Will can remember better than myself, but I think...
Let me interrupt you for one moment. Those who don't know, Will is the executive director and publisher at Deep Vellum.
Okay. I think I remember, yes. I used to have a different agent back in 2015, a different literary agent. And I think she got in touch with Will by that time, 2015, 2014, I'm not sure, 2014. And he said, and maybe she tried to sell my book to him and he got interested in it. And then he bought the rights for the book. And the book was translated by Julia Sanches, a very good friend of mine, an excellent translator. And it was released in 2016. I went to Mexico, I think, in 2015, and I met him in the Guadalajara book fair. And then finally in 2017, I have a very good friend who lives in New York, also a translator, called Eric Becker. And he arranged like a tour of the book throughout the United States. And so I went to Los Angeles, I went to Chicago, to Dallas, to New York, to Providence, talking about the book in universities and bookstores. And one of the places sure had to be Dallas. And I stayed in Deep Ellum and I loved it. And I met Will at the time, and he's a very nice person. And the bookstore, very nice, also very charming. And that's it.
And you came back and had a very good burger here.
Oh, yes.
The next, for now, it's the final question, is actually a great one that I'm very curious about from my own interests. How do you relate to other Jewish Brazilian authors? Clarice Lispector, Samuel Rowett, and others.
Who's the second one you mentioned?
Samuel Rowett. I don't know if you are, I don't know who of these you're in contact with.
I don't recognize the second name.
Can I say something?
Yeah, sure.
So Moacir is clear, Clarice Lispector, Samuel Rowett, Cynthia Moscovich.
Yes. Now I recognize all of them.
I appreciate it.
It's very nice that you know all these names. Well, Clarice Lispector is dead, right? Moacir Scliar is also dead. I admire them greatly. Clarice Lispector didn't feel Jewish, and so she never wrote about Judaism. But there are two biographies of her, and they talk about Judaism in her life, but in her writings, she never wrote about being a Jew, being Jewish. Moacir Scliar, yes, he wrote a lot about it, and he really felt Jewish, and I really admire him and his work, all of his writings. I read him a lot. As for the living Jewish writers in Brazil, we're not very much in contact because we live in different cities, but yes, somehow we always participate in seminars and congresses about Jewish writers in Brazil. Many of these writers, many of the Jewish writers like Michel Laube, he doesn't really care about being a Jew, but I'm very interested in Judaism and in the story of Judaism in our traditions, and Cynthia Moscovici that you mentioned also. So we sometimes talk through Facebook because she lives in a different city far from São Paulo. And yes, now soon, very soon in September, we're going to participate in a Congress of Brazilian Jewish writers. And so we always try to learn about what the other is doing, but we're not so much in contact. I'm more in contact with writers here in São Paulo who are not Jewish.
Thank you so much. Are there any other questions? I think that about wraps it up. Noemi, I am so appreciative. This is really fascinating. It was a wonderful tour and conversation. Thank you for joining live. And thank you to everyone else who joined. We hope you come back to more Deep Vellum events. We have some great ones coming up. It looks like, oh, wait, we have one more great question. What's the best burger in Brazil?
Well, the best burger in Brazil is here in São Paulo. We have many good burger houses here in São Paulo, so I can't even choose the best. But even the best burger in São Paulo doesn't, I don't know how to say that in English. It doesn't get even close to Twisted Roots.
Well, now you're just making us Dallasites feel, I don't know, very special, big egos.
Yes. No, nothing comes close to Twisted Roots. Go to Twisted Roots.
Well, thank you so much. And thanks to everyone who came. We really appreciate it. This is a wonderful event.
Thank you, Lindsay, and thank Deep Vellum, and send Will my regards and my hug, my virtual hug.
Well,
and to all of you who participated in this talk, thank you very much.